Every morning, thousands of yellow school buses roll through American neighborhoods carrying precious cargo, our children. Parents trust these drivers with their most valuable treasure, believing in a system that has worked for generations. But what happens when that trust is shattered in an instant? When a single moment of confusion turns a routine school day into every parent's worst nightmare? In Charlotte, North Carolina, one September morning would test the limits of maternal instinct, challenge the boundaries of school safety protocols, and reveal how quickly ordinary people can become heroes when a child's life hangs in the balance. This is the true story of how a mother's desperate cry, "Where are you taking her?" would echo through a community and change everything they thought they knew about keeping children safe. The yellow bus that morning looked exactly like every other school bus in the district. Same cheerful color, same familiar rumble of the engine, same trusted symbol of childhood routine. But the person behind the wheel was about to make a decision that would turn a simple school pickup into a heart-stopping race against time, where every second counted and every choice could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Sarah Martinez had always been the type of mother who noticed everything. She knew exactly when the school bus would arrive each morning, recognized the sound of its engine from 3 blocks away, and could tell if something was even slightly different about her daughter's routine. On this particular Tuesday morning in September, as she watched 8-year-old Emma skip toward the yellow bus with her backpack bouncing against her small shoulders, Sarah felt that familiar mix of pride and protectiveness that came with sending her child into the world. The bus driver was new. Sarah had noticed this the week before when the regular driver, Mrs. Barth Henderson, had been replaced without much explanation. The new driver was a middle-aged man with nervous eyes who seemed to check his route sheet constantly and spoke in short, clipped sentences when parents approached with questions. Something about him made Sarah uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact, or how he seemed to rush through the pickup routine that Mrs. Bowe Henderson had always handled with patience and care. Emma climbed the bus steps and turned to wave at her mother, her bright smile visible through the window as she found her usual seat near the front. Sarah waved back, watching as the bus pulled away from the curb with its precious cargo of neighborhood children. She stood there for a moment longer than usual, that nagging feeling in her stomach refusing to go away. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't explain what it was. The bus route to Pinewood Elementary was simple and well established. Mrs. Henderson had driven it for 12 years, and every parent in the neighborhood knew the exact path their children took to school each morning. The bus would continue down Maple Street, turn right onto Oak Avenue, make a brief stop at the traffic light on Main Street, then proceed directly to the school's circular driveway, where teachers would be waiting to guide the children safely inside. But today, something different happened. Instead of turning right onto Oak Avenue, as it had every morning for years, the bus continued straight down Maple Street. At first, none of the children noticed. They were busy chatting about homework assignments, trading Pokemon cards, and complaining about an upcoming math test. Emma was telling her friend Jessica about the new puppy her family was considering adopting when she glanced out the window and realized they were in an unfamiliar part of town. The buildings outside looked different from their usual route. Instead of the cozy residential neighborhood they normally pass through, Emma saw run-down warehouses and empty lots filled with weeds. The cheerful morning atmosphere on the bus began to shift as more children started noticing that something wasn't right. Whispered conversations broke out across the seats as kids compared notes about where they thought they were going. "This isn't the way to school," 10-year-old Marcus said loudly enough for everyone to hear. His voice carried the authority of someone who had been riding this bus route for 3 years and knew every landmark by heart. Several other children nodded in agreement, their faces showing the first signs of worry. Emma felt her stomach drop. She pressed her face against the window, searching desperately for something familiar, some sign that they were just taking a different route for construction or road work. But the farther they drove, the more lost they became. The comfortable suburb where she lived seemed like a distant memory, replaced by an industrial area that looked nothing like anywhere she had ever been before. The bus driver seemed to sense the growing unrest behind him. He kept glancing in his rearview mirror, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Beads of sweat were visible on his forehead despite the cool morning air. When 12-year-old Ashley, the oldest student on the bus, finally gathered enough courage to ask where they were going, the driver's response only made things worse. "Just sit down and be quiet," he snapped, his voice sharp and agitated. "We're taking a different route today." But there was no construction, no road closure, no legitimate reason for this detour that any of the children could see. The fear that had been building gradually in their young hearts suddenly exploded into panic. Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes as she thought about her mother, who was probably at home getting ready for work, completely unaware that her daughter was being driven to an unknown destination by a man whose behavior was becoming more erratic by the minute. Back at the school, Principal Roberts was conducting her usual morning routine of greeting arriving buses and ensuring that all students made it safely into the building. She had been working at Pinewood Elementary for 15 years and prided herself on knowing every child by name and every bus driver by sight. When the first few buses arrived and began unloading their passengers, she noticed immediately that Bus 47, Emma's bus, was not among them. At first, she assumed there might be a minor delay. Perhaps the new driver was running a few minutes late, or maybe there had been a brief mechanical issue that would resolve itself shortly. But as the minutes ticked by and more buses arrived without any sign of Bus 47, Principal Roberts began to feel concerned. She checked her watch and realized that the bus was now more than 20 minutes late, which was completely out of character for the usually punctual morning routine. She decided to call the transportation department to check on the bus's status. The conversation that followed would send chills down her spine and set in motion a chain of events that would mobilize every resource the school district had available. The transportation supervisor informed her that Bus 47 had left its designated route approximately 30 minutes earlier and was currently heading in the opposite direction from the school. The GPS tracking system showed the bus moving steadily away from Pinewood Elementary, deeper into an industrial section of Charlotte that was nowhere near any legitimate school-related destination. Even more troubling, the driver had not responded to multiple radio calls, asking him to explain his deviation from the approved route. The transportation department had been trying to reach him for the past 15 minutes with no success. Principal Roberts felt her heart rate accelerate as the full implications of the situation became clear. 23 children, including several kindergartners and first graders, were on a bus that was being driven by someone who was either having some kind of medical emergency or had deliberately chosen to take them somewhere they shouldn't be going. Either scenario was terrifying. She immediately implemented the school's emergency protocol for missing buses, which involved notifying the police, contacting the parents of every child on the bus, and coordinating with the district's security team to track the vehicle's location. Within minutes, her office became a command center, buzzing with activity as teachers, administrators, and law enforcement officials worked together to locate the missing bus and ensure the safety of the children on board. Meanwhile, the bus continued its journey through increasingly unfamiliar territory. The driver's behavior had become more agitated and unpredictable, and several of the older children had begun to seriously worry that something was very wrong. Emma found herself thinking about all the safety lessons her parents had taught her about stranger danger in emergency situations, but none of those lessons had prepared her for a scenario where the danger might be coming from someone who was supposed to be protecting her. The industrial area they were driving through seemed to stretch on forever, a maze of warehouses, loading docks, and empty parking lots that offered no comfort to the frightened children on board. Some of the younger kids had started crying openly, their sobs filling the usually cheerful space of the school bus with a sound that broke Emma's heart and made her even more determined to find a way to help. As the bus slowed down and began turning into what looked like an abandoned parking lot behind a cluster of empty buildings, Emma made a decision that would prove to be crucial in the events that followed. Despite her fear and her young age, she quietly pulled out the emergency cell phone her mother had given her for exactly this type of situation. Her hand shaking, she managed to dial her mother's number, praying that Sarah would answer and somehow be able to help them before it was too late. Sarah Martinez was in the middle of preparing her morning coffee when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's emergency phone number, and Sarah's blood instantly ran cold. She had given her daughter that phone with strict instructions to use it only in real emergencies, and Emma had never called from it before. With trembling hands, Sarah answered the call. "Mom?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper, filled with fear and confusion. "Mom, I think something's wrong with our bus driver." "We're not going to school. I don't know where we are." The coffee cup slipped from Sarah's hand and shattered on the kitchen floor, but she barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to the sound of her daughter's frightened voice coming through the phone. "Emma, baby, what do you mean you're not going to school? Where are you right now?" "I don't know," Emma whispered, clearly trying to keep her voice low so the driver wouldn't hear her. "We passed a bunch of empty buildings and warehouses. The bus driver won't tell us where we're going." "Mum, I'm scared. All the kids are scared." Sarah's maternal instincts kicked into overdrive. She grabbed her car keys with one hand while keeping the phone pressed to her ear with the other. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. Keep this phone hidden and keep talking to me, but quietly. Can you see any street signs or building names? Anything that might tell me where you are?" Through the phone, Sarah could hear the sound of crying children and the rumble of the bus engine. Emma's voice came back even quieter than before. We just turned into some kind of parking lot. There's a big blue building with broken windows, and I can see a sign that says Metro Industrial Park, but some of the letters are missing. Sarah was already running to her car, her heart pounding so hard she could barely think straight. She knew exactly where Metro Industrial Park was located. It was a mostly abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of Charlotte, the kind of place where no school bus had any business taking children. The fact that the driver had deliberately brought a bus full of kids to such an isolated location sent terror shooting through every fiber of her being. "Emma, I need you to stay on the phone with me and keep telling me everything you see," Sarah said as she started her car and began backing out of her driveway at a speed that would have horrified her under normal circumstances. "I'm coming to get you right now, and I'm calling the police too." While keeping Emma on the line, Sarah used her car's hands-free system to dial 911. The emergency dispatcher who answered could immediately hear the panic in her voice as she explained the situation. Within seconds of hearing that a school bus full of children had been taken to an abandoned industrial area by a driver who was not following his designated route, the dispatcher had mobilized multiple units and put out an all-points bulletin for Bus 47. Back on the bus, Emma was doing her best to stay calm and provide her mother with information, while also trying to comfort some of the younger children who were crying louder now. The bus had come to a complete stop in the parking lot, but the driver had not opened the doors or made any move to let the children off. Instead, he was sitting in his seat, staring out the windshield with an expression that frightened Emma even more than their current location. "Mum, the driver looks really weird," Emma whispered into her phone. "He's just sitting there not moving, and he's breathing really hard. Jessica is crying, and little Tommy from kindergarten is asking for his mummy. What should I do?" Sarah was driving as fast as she dared through the morning traffic, her mind racing through every possible scenario and none of them good. "You're doing perfect, baby. Just keep talking to me and stay calm. Can you tell me exactly what the driver is doing right now?" "He's looking at something in his hand," Emma reported, her voice getting smaller. "It looks like a piece of paper with writing on it. And he keeps looking back at us kids, but not in a nice way. Mum, why would he bring us here? This place looks scary." The question broke Sarah's heart because she didn't have an answer that wouldn't terrify her daughter even more. The truth was that there were very few innocent explanations for why a school bus driver would take children to an abandoned industrial area, especially after deliberately ignoring radio calls from his supervisors. Sarah's mind was filled with horrifying possibilities, but she forced herself to focus on getting to her daughter as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, at Pinewood Elementary, the situation had escalated into a full emergency response. Principal Roberts had managed to contact most of the parents whose children were on the missing bus, and several of them were now gathered in her office, demanding answers and action. The atmosphere was charged with the kind of desperate energy that only comes when parents fear for their children's safety. Detective Michael Torres had arrived at the school and was coordinating with the transportation department to track the bus's exact location using GPS. The tracking system showed that Bus 47 had been stationary for the past several minutes at Metro Industrial Park, which was concerning for several reasons. The area was known to be largely abandoned, with poor cell phone reception and multiple exit routes that could make it difficult for law enforcement to corner a vehicle if the driver decided to run. "We need to approach this very carefully," Detective Torres explained to the assembled parents. "If the driver is having some kind of mental health crisis, or if there are other factors involved, our primary concern has to be the safety of the children. We're mobilizing tactical units, but we need to be prepared for the possibility that this situation could escalate quickly." The parents in the room exchanged terrified glances. These were ordinary people who had sent their children off to school that morning expecting nothing more dramatic than a spelling test or a playground disagreement. Now they were being briefed on tactical units in crisis situations involving their babies. Several mothers began crying, while fathers paced the room like caged animals, desperate to take action, but forced to wait for professionals to handle the situation. Back in her car, Sarah was making record time toward Metro Industrial Park while staying connected to both Emma and the emergency dispatcher. The dispatcher had confirmed that multiple police units were en route to the same location, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that every second counted. Her daughter's voice on the phone was getting more strained, and the background noise from the other children was becoming increasingly distressed. "Mom, the driver is getting up from his seat," Emma suddenly whispered urgently. "He's walking toward the back of the bus. All the kids are trying to get away from him. Mom, what if he tries to hurt us?" "Emma, listen to me," Sarah said, her voice somehow managing to stay calm despite the terror coursing through her veins. "I want you and all the other kids to stay together near the front of the bus. If the driver tries to make you get off the bus, you tell him no and you stay in your seats. Can you do that for me?" "I think so," Emma replied, though her voice was shaking now. "Jessica and Marcus are helping me talk to the little kids. We're all sitting together now. But Mum, the driver is acting really strange. He keeps talking to himself and looking at that paper." Through her phone, Sarah could hear the man's voice in the background, though she couldn't make out the words. His tone sounded agitated and unstable, which only increased her urgency to reach the industrial park as quickly as possible. She was now less than 5 minutes away, but those 5 minutes felt like an eternity when her child was potentially in danger. The GPS tracker at the school showed that the bus was still stationary. But Detective Torres was growing increasingly concerned about the driver's mental state based on the reports coming from Emma's phone call. The fact that the man had taken children to such an isolated location suggested either a complete psychological breakdown or something even more sinister. Either way, the situation required immediate intervention by trained professionals. As Sarah turned onto the access road leading to Metro Industrial Park, she could see police cars in the distance, their red and blue lights flashing silently in the morning sun. The sight should have been reassuring, but instead it made the reality of the situation hit her even harder. Her little girl was somewhere in that maze of abandoned buildings with a man whose intentions remained completely unknown. "Emma, baby, I can see where you are now," Sarah said into her phone. "The police are here too. Everything is going to be okay. Just stay exactly where you are and keep talking to me." But even as she said the words, Sarah's heart was filled with dread. She had no idea what they were about to find when they reached that school bus, or whether her daughter and the other children would be safe. All she knew was that she would do whatever it took to protect Emma, even if it meant putting herself in danger. The yellow bus that had seemed so innocent and safe just an hour earlier had become the setting for every parent's worst nightmare. As Sarah pulled into the parking lot of Metro Industrial Park, her heart nearly stopped at what she saw. The familiar yellow school bus sat in the middle of the empty asphalt, like a beacon of innocence surrounded by decay. Police cars had formed a perimeter around the area, but they were keeping their distance, clearly trying to assess the situation before taking action. Through her phone, she could still hear Emma's whispered voice, but her daughter's words were becoming more urgent and frightened. "Mum, the driver is standing up now, and he's talking really loud," Emma reported. "He's saying something about how nobody understands him and that he never meant for things to go this way." All the kids are crying now, even the big kids. "I'm trying to help keep everyone calm, but I'm scared too." Detective Torres approached Sarah's car as she parked behind the police perimeter. His face was grim but professional as he introduced himself and quickly briefed her on what they knew so far. The bus driver's name was Robert Chen, and this was only his second week on the job. He had passed all the required background checks and drug tests, but his supervisors had noted that he seemed unusually nervous and stressed during training. "We're trying to establish communication with him now," Detective Torres explained. "Our negotiator is on the way, but we need to be very careful about how we approach this. Based on what your daughter has told us, Mr. Chen appears to be having some kind of psychological episode. He may not be thinking clearly, which makes him unpredictable." Sarah's hands were shaking as she watched the bus through the windshield of her car. From this distance, she couldn't see inside clearly, but she could imagine her brave little girl doing her best to take care of the other children while dealing with her own fear. The thought of Emma trying to be strong for everyone else made Sarah's heart break and fill with pride at the same time. Inside the bus, Emma was doing exactly what her mother imagined. Despite being only 8 years old, she had somehow become the unofficial leader of the frightened children. She was sitting with 5-year-old Tommy, who had been crying for his mother since the bus first deviated from its normal route. Marcus and Jessica were helping her keep the younger kids calm, while Ashley, the oldest student on board, was keeping watch on the driver's increasingly erratic behavior. Robert Chen was pacing in the narrow aisle between the seats, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in one hand and occasionally stopping to stare out the windows at the police cars surrounding them. His behavior had become more agitated since they arrived at the industrial park, and the children could sense that something was seriously wrong with the man who was supposed to be taking care of them. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he kept muttering to himself, loud enough for the children to hear. "They said it would be simple. Just drive the bus to the location and wait for instructions. Nobody said there would be children involved. Nobody told me there would be children." Emma's blood ran cold as she listened to these words. It sounded like Mr. Chen had been planning something, but whatever it was, The presence of children had complicated his plans in a way he hadn't expected. She squeezed Tommy's hand tighter and whispered reassurances that she wasn't sure she believed herself. Outside the bus, the police were setting up communication equipment to try to talk to the driver. They had identified Robert Chen as a man with no criminal history but significant recent financial troubles. His wife had filed for divorce 3 months earlier. He had lost his previous job as a warehouse supervisor due to company layoffs, and he had been struggling to pay child support for his own 2 children. The psychological profile suggested a man under extreme stress who might have been recruited for some kind of scheme that had gone wrong. Sarah was allowed to stay connected to Emma's phone, providing a crucial link between the children inside the bus and the law enforcement officials trying to resolve the situation. Every few minutes, Emma would provide updates on the driver's behavior and the condition of the other children. The little girl's calm, detailed reports impressed everyone who heard them, but they also highlighted just how frightening the situation had become. "The driver is looking at his watch a lot," Emma whispered into her phone. "And he keeps checking his own phone, but he looks angry every time he looks at it. It's like he's waiting for someone to call him or text him, but they're not doing it. Mum, what if he decides to drive us somewhere else?" That possibility had been worrying the police as well. As long as the bus remained stationary, they could control the situation and work toward a peaceful resolution. But if Chen decided to leave the parking lot, especially with 23 children on board, the situation would become exponentially more dangerous. The industrial park had multiple exit routes, and a chase scenario involving a school bus full of kids was every law enforcement officer's worst nightmare. Detective Torres made the decision to attempt direct communication with Chen before the situation could deteriorate further. Using a bullhorn, he identified himself as a police officer and asked Chen to step off the bus so they could talk. The response was immediate and concerning. "Stay away from me," Chen shouted back, his voice clearly audible through the bus windows. "You don't understand what's happening here. I was just supposed to drive the bus and wait. Nobody said anything about kids being involved." The children inside the bus huddled closer together as their driver's voice rose to nearly a scream. Several of the younger ones began crying harder, and Emma found herself fighting back tears as she tried to comfort them while providing information to her mother over the phone. "He's really upset now, Mum," Emma whispered. "He's saying he was supposed to meet someone here, but they haven't shown up. And he keeps saying he never wanted to hurt any children." "But Mum, if he never wanted to hurt us, why did he bring us here?" It was a question that was troubling everyone involved in the situation. The evidence suggested that Chen had been recruited as part of some larger scheme, possibly involving the theft of the school bus itself. But the presence of children on their normal route to school had created a complication that none of the planners had anticipated. Now Chen was stuck with 23 scared kids in an abandoned parking lot, waiting for accomplices who might never arrive. Sarah's phone conversation with Emma was being monitored by the police, and the information was proving invaluable for understanding Chen's mental state and planning their response. But as the minutes ticked by, everyone involved was becoming increasingly worried that Chen might panic and make a decision that could endanger the children. Inside the bus, Ashley had been quietly observing everything and had come to her own conclusion about what was happening. As the oldest student and the most mature, she understood more about the situation than the younger children. During a moment when Chen was distracted by looking out the windows, she leaned over to Emma and whispered her concerns. "Emma, I think this man was planning to steal our bus," Ashley said quietly. "But he didn't know we would be on it when he did it. That's why he keeps saying he didn't mean for children to be involved. I think he's waiting for other bad people to meet him here, but they're not coming because of all the police cars." Emma processed this information and felt a new wave of fear wash over her. If Ashley was right, then they were all caught in the middle of a crime that had gone wrong. The driver wasn't necessarily planning to hurt them, but he was desperate and scared, which made him dangerous in a different way. "What do you think we should do?" Emma asked Ashley, still keeping her voice low. "I think we need to be ready to run if we get the chance," Ashley replied. "If he opens the bus door for any reason, we need to get all these little kids off the bus as fast as we can and run toward those police cars." Emma nodded, understanding the importance of having a plan. She quietly began telling some of the other older children about Ashley's idea, making sure that everyone knew to watch for any opportunity to escape. But even as they made these plans, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Outside, Detective Torres was growing increasingly concerned about Chen's psychological state. The man's responses to attempts at communication were becoming more erratic and desperate. It was clear that he was waiting for something or someone that wasn't coming, and his growing realization that his situation was hopeless was making him more unpredictable by the minute. The detective knew that they were rapidly approaching a point where they would need to take more direct action to ensure the safety of the children. But with 23 young lives at stake, every decision carried enormous risk. One wrong move could turn an already dangerous situation into a complete disaster. The situation reached a critical turning point when Robert Chen's phone finally rang. Everyone watching could see him snatch it up desperately, his face initially showing relief that quickly transformed into anger, and then panic. Through the bus windows, they could see him arguing with whoever was on the other end of the call, his gestures becoming more agitated with each passing second. Emma pressed her own phone closer to her ear, trying to hear what her mother was saying while also listening to the driver's increasingly loud conversation. What she heard sent chills down her spine. "What do you mean you're not coming?" Chen shouted into his phone. "I did exactly what you told me to do. I drove the bus to the location, and now I'm surrounded by cops. You can't just leave me here." There was a pause as he listened to the response, and then Chen's voice rose to a near scream.
"I don't care about your excuses. You got me into this mess, and now there are children involved."
23 kids who were never supposed to be part of this. What am I supposed to do with 23 kids? Emma's heart sank as the full reality of their situation became clear. Ashley had been right. The driver had been part of some kind of plan to steal the bus, but something had gone wrong. Now they were all trapped in the middle of a crime that had spiraled completely out of control. Sarah, listening through her daughter's phone, felt rage and terror battling in her chest as she heard Chen's conversation. Her baby and 22 other innocent children had been put in danger because of some criminal scheme that had clearly not accounted for the presence of students on the bus. She wanted to storm onto that bus herself and get Emma to safety. But the police officers around her made it clear that any sudden movement could make the situation worse. Detective Torres was coordinating with his team, trying to decide on the best course of action. The phone call had confirmed their suspicions about Chen being part of a larger criminal operation, but it had also revealed that he was now essentially abandoned by his accomplices. This made him more dangerous, because he had nothing left to lose and no clear way out of the situation. Inside the bus, Chen ended his phone call and stared at the device in his hand for a long moment. Then, without warning, he hurled it against the front windshield with such force that it cracked the glass. The sound of the impact sent several of the younger children into fresh waves of tears, and Emma felt her own composure beginning to crack. "This is all wrong," Chen muttered, beginning to pace again. This was supposed to be simple. Drive the bus, meet the contact, get paid, and disappear. Nobody mentioned anything about children being on the bus. Nobody told me I'd be responsible for a bunch of scared kids. Tommy, the kindergartner sitting next to Emma, tugged on her sleeve with tears streaming down his face. "Emma, I want to go home," he whispered. "I want my mommy." Emma's heart broke as she looked into the little boy's frightened eyes. Despite her own fear, she found strength in the need to protect him and the other children around her. "It's going to be okay, Tommy," she said softly, pulling him closer. "My mum is right outside with the police officers, and they're all working to get us home safely." But even as she said the words, Emma wasn't sure she believed them. The driver was becoming more agitated by the minute, and she could see the police cars surrounding them, which meant this wasn't going to end quickly or easily. She thought about her mother, probably sick with worry, and wished desperately that she could just run off the bus and into Sarah's arms. Outside, Sarah was indeed sick with worry. She had heard Chen's phone conversation through Emma's hidden call, and the implications terrified her. Her daughter and the other children weren't just victims of a confused or mentally ill bus driver. They were hostages in a criminal operation that had gone wrong, which made their situation infinitely more dangerous. "We need to get those children off that bus now," Sarah said to Detective Torres, her voice shaking with desperation. "He's getting more unstable by the minute, and those kids are terrified." "We're working on it," Torres replied, his own voice tense with the stress of the situation. "But we have to be very careful. If we move too quickly or aggressively, he might panic and do something that could hurt the children. Our priority has to be getting them out safely." The detective's radio crackled with updates from the tactical team that was positioning themselves around the parking lot. They had identified multiple approach routes to the bus, but all of them carried significant risk. The bus's design made it difficult to approach without being seen, and Chen's increasingly erratic behavior suggested that any surprise might trigger a violent reaction. Back inside the bus, Emma was trying to keep track of everything that was happening while maintaining her phone connection with her mother. She noticed that Ashley and Marcus had quietly moved closer to the emergency exit at the back of the bus, and she realized they were preparing for the possibility of having to evacuate quickly. The thought of trying to get 23 panicked children off a school bus and to safety made her feel overwhelmed, but she knew they had to be ready for anything. Chen had stopped pacing and was now standing at the front of the bus, staring out at the police cars surrounding them. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and his hands were shaking as he gripped the metal rail beside the driver's seat. Emma could see sweat staining his shirt despite the cool morning air, and his eyes had a wild look that scared her more than anything else about their situation. "They left me," Chen said suddenly, though he seemed to be talking to himself rather than to the children. 23 years of following the rules, doing what I was told, being a good citizen, and where did it get me? Divorced, unemployed, and desperate enough to listen to criminals who promised me easy money. Some of the older children were listening to his words, trying to understand what was happening to them. Jessica, who was sitting near Emma, whispered a question that captured what they were all thinking. "Emma, is he going to hurt us?" Emma looked at her friend's frightened face and made a decision that would prove crucial in the moments that followed. Instead of giving in to her own fear, she chose to be the strong, calm presence that the other children needed. Her mother had taught her that sometimes being brave meant taking care of others even when you were scared yourself. "I don't think he wants to hurt us," Emma whispered back. "I think he's just scared and confused like we are. But we need to stick together and be ready to help each other if we need to get off this bus quickly." Her words seemed to have a calming effect on the children around her. Even in their fear, they recognized Emma's strength and found comfort in having someone who seemed to know what to do. Unknown to them, their quiet conversation was being transmitted to Sarah's phone and then to the police, giving the tactical team valuable insight into the children's state of mind and readiness to evacuate if necessary. Detective Torres made the decision to attempt one more direct communication with Chen before considering more aggressive options. Using the bullhorn, he addressed the driver in a calm, non-threatening voice. "Mr. Chen, this is Detective Torres. I know you're in a difficult situation and I want to help you resolve this safely. The children on your bus are scared, and their parents are worried sick. What can we do to get those kids back to their families where they belong?" Chen's response was immediate and filled with anguish. "You can't help me," he shouted back. "My life is over. I lost my job, my wife left me, I can't pay my bills, and now I'm probably going to prison for the rest of my life. All because I was stupid enough to trust people who said they would help me." The pain in his voice was genuine, and it gave everyone listening insight into the desperation that had led him to make such terrible choices. But it also revealed the depth of his crisis, which made him even more unpredictable and dangerous. Inside the bus, Emma felt a strange combination of fear and sympathy as she listened to Chen's outburst. She was old enough to understand that adults sometimes made bad decisions when they were desperate, but young enough to still believe that problems could be solved if people just tried hard enough to help each other. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, her young voice carrying clearly through the bus. "My mom says that when people make mistakes, the best thing to do is try to fix them. Maybe if you let us go home to our families, people would understand that you didn't mean to hurt anyone." The silence that followed Emma's words was deafening. Chen turned around slowly to look at the brave little girl who had dared to speak to him directly. For a moment, his angry expression softened, and everyone could see the conflict playing out across his face as he struggled between his desperation and his basic human decency. Emma's brave words hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Robert Chen stared at the 8-year-old girl who had somehow found the courage to speak directly to him, and for the first time since this nightmare began, something shifted in his expression. The wild desperation in his eyes gave way to something that looked almost like recognition of what he had done. "You're just a little kid," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "You're all just little kids and I've scared you. This was never supposed to happen. The bus was supposed to be empty when I drove it here." Emma nodded solemnly, sensing that this might be their chance to reach him. Despite her fear, she found herself speaking again, channeling every lesson about kindness and understanding that her parents had taught her. "We know you're scared too, Mr. Eisen." "Chen," she said softly. "My mom says that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're worried about taking care of their families. But she also says that it's never too late to do the right thing." Around her, the other children watched in amazement as their young classmate continued to talk calmly to the man who had terrified them all morning. Even Tommy, the kindergartner who had been crying almost continuously, had stopped sobbing and was listening intently to Emma's words. Outside the bus, Sarah was listening to her daughter's conversation with a mixture of pride and terror. She couldn't believe that her 8-year-old was attempting to negotiate with a desperate criminal, but she was also incredibly proud of Emma's courage and wisdom. Through her phone, she could hear every word, and she prayed that her daughter's compassion might be the key to ending this situation safely. Detective Torres and his team were equally amazed by what they were witnessing. They had seen professional negotiators with years of training struggle to connect with hostage-takers in crisis. Yet this brave little girl seemed to be reaching Chen in a way that their official attempts had failed to achieve. Chen took a step closer to where Emma was sitting, and several of the children instinctively moved back, but Emma remained still, looking up at him with eyes that showed fear, but also genuine concern for his well-being. It was this unexpected compassion from a child he had terrorized that finally broke through his desperation. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Chen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just needed the money so badly. My ex-wife was threatening to take my kids away permanently if I couldn't pay child support, and these people said all I had to do was drive a bus to a location and wait. They said it would be empty, just a simple theft that wouldn't hurt anybody. But you can still fix it," Emma replied, her young voice steady despite her fear. "You can let us go home to our families, and then maybe the police officers can help you figure out what to do next. My mom says that police officers are supposed to help people, not just arrest them." Ashley, the oldest student on the bus, found her own courage inspired by Emma's example. "Mr. Chen, we promise we won't be mad at you if you let us go," she added. "We can tell everyone that you were just scared and that you took care of us when you realized we were on the bus." The other children began nodding and murmuring their agreement. Despite everything they had been through, these remarkable young people were offering forgiveness and understanding to the man who had put them in danger. It was a display of compassion that moved everyone who witnessed it, including Chen himself. Tears began streaming down Chen's face as the full weight of what these children were offering him became clear. They were giving him a chance at redemption, an opportunity to end this situation with at least some measure of dignity intact. More importantly, they were showing him that his life wasn't over, that he still had a chance to do the right thing. "You kids are amazing," he said through his tears. "I don't deserve your kindness, but you're right. I need to get you back to your families where you belong." Chen walked slowly to the front of the bus and sat down in the driver's seat. For a moment, everyone held their breath, unsure whether he was planning to drive away or to surrender. Then he reached for the lever that opened the bus door, and the hydraulic hiss that followed was the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. "Everyone can get off the bus now," Chen announced, his voice steady for the first time all morning. "Walk slowly toward the police officers, and they'll take you back to your families." The children didn't need to be told twice. Led by Ashley and Emma, they filed off the bus in an orderly fashion that would have made their teachers proud. The younger children stayed close to the older ones, and everyone moved together as a group toward the waiting police officers and paramedics. Sarah broke through the police perimeter the moment she saw Emma step off the bus. Mother and daughter ran toward each other across the parking lot, and their reunion was watched by dozens of hardened law enforcement officers who found themselves wiping away tears at the sight of the family being reunited. "Oh, Emma. Baby, I was so scared," Sarah sobbed as she held her daughter tight. "I'm so proud of how brave you were, but I never want you to have to go through anything like that again." "I'm okay, Mom," Emma replied, though she was crying too now that the ordeal was finally over. "I was scared, but I knew you were out here trying to help us, and I think Mr. Chen is okay too. He just made some bad choices because he was worried about his own kids." The other children were being reunited with their own parents, who had arrived from the school in a convoy of cars and emergency vehicles. There were tears of relief and joy as families that had been torn apart by fear were brought back together. Paramedics checked each child for signs of trauma or injury, but amazingly, all 23 students were physically unharmed. Robert Chen remained on the bus for several more minutes after the children had been evacuated. When he finally stepped off, he immediately placed his hands behind his back and waited for the officers to arrest him. His cooperation and the children's testimony about his behavior during the crisis would later be factors in his sentencing, but for now, he simply seemed relieved that the nightmare was over and that no children had been hurt. Detective Torres approached Chen as he was being placed in handcuffs. "For what it's worth," the detective said quietly, "those kids spoke up for you. They said you took care of them once you realized what had happened. That says something about the kind of person you really are underneath all this." Chen nodded, unable to speak through his emotions. He looked back at the group of children who were now safely in their parents' arms, and he knew that their forgiveness would stay with him for the rest of his life. He had made terrible choices that could have resulted in unthinkable tragedy, but somehow these remarkable young people had found it in their hearts to show him compassion even in their darkest hour. In the months that followed, the story of Bus 47 would become legendary in Charlotte. Emma Martinez became known as the little girl who helped save her classmates through courage and compassion, though she always insisted that everyone on the bus had been brave in their own way. The children formed bonds that would last throughout their school years, united by their shared experience and the knowledge that they had faced danger together and emerged stronger. Robert Chen pleaded guilty to kidnapping and other charges, but his cooperation in the children's testimony resulted in a sentence that focused on rehabilitation rather than pure punishment. He received counseling for his financial and emotional problems, and he eventually found stable employment that allowed him to rebuild his relationship with his own children. He never forgot the lesson that Emma and her classmates had taught him about the power of forgiveness and second chances. The school district implemented new safety protocols and monitoring systems to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. But perhaps more importantly, the story of what happened that September morning became a teaching tool about courage, compassion, and the amazing strength that children can show in the face of adversity. Years later, when Emma was asked about that terrifying morning, she would always say that she learned something important that day. She discovered that even when you're scared, you can still choose to be kind. She learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to see the scared person behind someone's angry actions and offer them hope instead of hatred. The yellow school bus that had carried them into danger became a symbol of something much more powerful. It represented the idea that even in the darkest situations, ordinary people can become heroes through simple acts of courage and compassion. And it proved that sometimes the smallest voices can speak the loudest truths and change the course of events in ways that no one could have predicted. The children of Bus 47 had started their day as ordinary students heading to school for another routine day of learning. They ended it as heroes who had shown a broken man that redemption was possible and that kindness could triumph over fear. Their story would be told for years to come as an example of how courage and compassion can emerge from the most unlikely places and transform even the darkest situations into opportunities for hope and healing.